Backstory. I, 31 female, purchased my three-family home for my grandparents 4 years ago well below market value. My grandparents wanted to retire to Florida and wanted to keep their house in the family. The house was worth a lot more than I could afford alone. So I talked to my cousin and said, hey, if we purchase it, we can fix it up and rent it out. We could split the rent 7 ways for residual income. They all turned me down and said they didn't want the old crappy house. I spoke to my grandparents and expressed interest. They offered to sell it to me for way less than market value, and I could use the remaining money to renovate. I decided to rent the top 2 apartments for a reasonable price and live in the smallest unit. My little brother and his friends live on my first floor. They pay less than market rent. 2 months ago, my top floor tenant let me know she wouldn't be renewing her lease in October since her fiancé got a job offer in another state and they are expecting. Issue. One of the cousins I had gone to found out and wants to move out of her small 2-bedroom apartment and into the 4-bedroom. So her husband and son have more space. Both their jobs will remain from home and they want offices. I said sure and offered her $250 below market value. She got irritated and started ranting that I shouldn't ask her to pay anything because this is a family home. I said myself and little brother pays to live here. She said not her problem, that I owed it to her since I stole the house. She then threatened to take me to court and rally up the other cousins and say that I got the house through fraud and our grandparents weren't in their right mind. She said the only way she wouldn't is if I let her live there rent-free until they want to move, or I pay them her share of the house. I laughed and told her she could now either pay the market value, stay in her tiny overpriced apartment, or pay market rate somewhere else. She then said that I was a money-hungry bee. So I told her stay cramped, bee, and hung up. She has now told the whole family and is trying to get all cousins involved to sue me for their fair share of the house's worth. The family is split, with some saying she can kick rocks and others saying I shouldn't be charging family rent as I got the house for extremely cheap. Even my friends are divided because on paper it looks like I did take advantage, but I'm not sure. Honestly, I could afford for everyone to live there rent-free and they only pay utilities, but I don't want to. So am I the a-hole? Not the a-hole. Your grandparents owned the house and sold the house to you. At what point did all these cousins think that their name was on the title too? They were never the owners, so they never had a say in the matter. A lawyer would laugh at them. I would ignore everything they have to say. Or ask them where it says their name's on the title of the house. Not the a-hole. You offered originally to share the house with your cousins and fix it up. They didn't want an old crappy house. Now that it is not, they want a slice of the pie? Duck off. If she wants to get courts involved, sue her for extortion and defamation of character. Not the a-hole. She's the money-hungry individual who didn't want to pay in for the house and doesn't want to pay rent to live there. If she can afford a lawyer, she could have afforded rent. If she was foolish enough to write down this threat, make or get copies, and see a lawyer, and possibly even police for extortion threats. Update. I got an attorney and my grandparents got one. I received all the documentation as well as a clean bill of health and mental state. My cousins got an attorney who sent me a request to mediate before going to the courts. We met Monday. Their attorney seemed confident, almost trying to rush us to settle. They demanded that the property's current value be divided by 7. I jumped in and added by 8 since my brother is now an adult. Their lawyer was very aggressive and rude, until my attorney pulled out all the emails, text messages, and the will documents. Apparently, my grandparents kept all that paperwork with their will because the house originally was supposed to be an inheritance, and they wanted to make sure that when they updated their will, all the appropriate steps were taken to ensure it was removed in fully minds. Needless to say, their attorney wanted out of there faster than a mouse. Currently, we are rescheduled to discuss further next month, once all the documents have been reviewed on their side. As I was leaving, the crap started, made a comment that I wasn't a legitimate grandchild, and to ask my spoiled mother what she meant by that. That story will be for another time in sub. However, some 50-year-old family secrets have spilled out over this. My grandparents have gone no contact with 3 cousins. What this greedy, grubby cousin doesn't understand is the property still has to be maintained and serviced. It's only right she pay rent, only if it's a peppercorn rent. Personally, it would be hell having her living under your roof. I'm getting married this summer. At first, we wanted to just have a ceremony in a pretty place without anyone. Then 2 of our moms were added. Then another 12 or so relatives. No friends of mine or my fiancé's. Then we decided to have a small banquet somewhere to celebrate. I found a beautiful place where you can rent a lakeside pavilion with a staff and food. I really fell in love with that place. But then in a few days, my girlfriend gets a call from her mom who said, "Hey, Steve came by," this cousin-in-law in question, "and he said you should change the venue because the traffic will be bad after we're done and go home." My fiancé loves her family and hates disappointing people. aka a pushover. So she said okay. After she told me what's happening, I said he had no ducking right making claims like these, and we haven't even invited anyone yet. We told and showed pictures to my moms, and apparently my girlfriend's mom told Steve, who was opposed to that place. Well, after we told girlfriend's mom that we're appalled at Steve's behavior, when you're invited, if something doesn't suit you, you just don't come. It started a chain reaction among their relatives. I only have my mom, so no drama. He started pushing a narrative that he is not afraid of a traffic jam himself, but was worried about his father-in-law, who's almost 80. Father-in-law's wife had a flight with my girlfriend's mom, who is her sister. So 6 people out of potentially 12 invited already said they weren't coming to that place I want. All that without any official invitations yet. We're very stressed and surprised. We started planning the easiest, least offensive wedding possible, and some dude is afraid of a possible 1.5 hours drive back home. But that's not all. A few days ago, he called my fiancée asking if she knew someone who could create a website for his company. He knows that's my profession. She gave me the phone, and the first thing he cheerfully said, "Hey, future relative." I got some details and told him I'd think about it. I told my significant other that I'm not going to help him. He didn't bother to call us to explain his point of view on our banquet location, and instead started spreading God knows what behind our backs among older relatives who don't drive and probably don't even know the location. He might as well have told them it was a 10-hour ride to make them all call and preventatively decline the invitation. Again, through my significant other's mom. But when it came to his company and his profits, he called us directly. I told my fiancé he's a jerk, and I'm not going to help him, but she's upset because she wants everyone to be super friendly to each other. Am I the a-hole? You are not the a-hole, but I also really don't understand the tension here. It seems like your fiancé is extremely conflict averse, to the extent that she doesn't even want to clear up a simple disagreement or miscommunication. I feel like the conflict is even bigger now by lack of communication on her part. Solve this rather sooner than later. Don't wait for the invitations to be sent. You and your fiancé need to sit her family down. Cousin's website can wait. Not the a-hole. Guy is a douche. You plan your wedding for you and your wife. Y'all two are the ones getting married, not anyone else. If they come, fine. If they don't, fine. But me? I would make sure no matter what my plans are, douche does not get an invite. And no, don't help him, unless you're going to overcharge him. Not the a-hole, but your wife needs to grow a spine. Not gonna lie, you blindsided yourself, because you knew in advance the hill you were joining is the hill your wife sets herself on fire for others. Instead of taking things super personally, you need to properly communicate with your future wife. Clearly you don't, and never learn to do so because she makes promises to her family behind your back, and then you get a surprised reaction as if you didn't know she'd do it. The cousin is not your problem. You and your future wife's relationship is just unstable when it comes to how you let her put you two in a bad situation, only for you to act oblivious and go, "What? How did this happen?" My sister died when her 2 children were very young. Her husband raised the children as a single dad until he died 3 years ago. My niece, let's call her Brenda, is 34. My nephew, let's call him Brian, is 30. I, 49 female, have always been close with Brenda. I sort of took her under my wing after my sister died. She comes to me for guidance. I have children of my own, but I consider Brenda my bonus daughter. She was very close with her father, and she was utterly devastated when he died suddenly. Brian has always been in his own world. He didn't have much of a relationship with his father, and he has always been distant with me and my children. He moved 13 hours away when he was 21, and he got married there. He barely visits. Brian hates Brenda. He estranged himself from her right after their father died. He claims that Brenda picks on him and his wife. He also claims that Brenda stole his inheritance. Brenda can be spirited and emotional sometimes, and she says things she doesn't mean, but she's a good person with a big heart. She goes to church with me, and Brian and his wife haven't stepped foot into a church in a long time. Brenda helps out with my mother, and Brian visits my mother, his own grandmother, only every 1 or 2 years. We have no idea what Brian is doing with his life. I stayed out of the inheritance situation because it's none of my business. Brenda was very devastated when her brother disowned her. She has no family left except me, my children, and my mother. I spent a lot of time supporting her through it. Recently, my mother had a 75th birthday party, and Brian came. Of course, his wife couldn't be bothered to come. Brenda was out of town, so she wasn't there. Brian and I sat at the same table with my children and their own significant others. I updated Brian on how Brenda was doing, and he blew up at me. He told me that he didn't care about his sister and what was going on with her. He demanded that I stop talking about her. I told him that I wished he would make amends with her, and he scoffed and said it would never happen. I suggested that he move back home and maybe they'll get past all this because it's what his parents would have wanted. He said nothing and stormed off. I was humiliated because he spoke to me in a disrespectful way in front of my children, and he was talking so loudly that other tables could hear him. My son and his girlfriend admitted that they don't like Brenda either. That was news to me, and I should respect Brian's wishes. I tried to explain my feelings, but they told me to post here. Am I the a-hole? Yes, the a-hole. From what you wrote, you have no idea about Brian's side at all. You're wrong to presume you can lecture him on that relationship since you only know one side of it. And you were even more wrong to choose to discuss the situation with him at an event for your mother, while you were sitting with a bunch of family members instead of asking to speak with him privately, and not at a family event. The fact that you felt humiliated is entirely your own fault. How do you think Brian felt having what is obviously a very sensitive issue brought up while he's at an event with a bunch of family members that he rarely sees? Right? Poor guy moved 13 hours away, doesn't even want to hear if his sister is alive. Yet somehow, OP thinks it's constructive advice to ask him to move back and make amends with his sister because dead people would have liked that. Sit down, OP. Yes, the a-hole. Yes, the a-hole. Big time. First, what does going to church have to do with anything? Second, you admit Brenda says things that are mean. You have taken her side without considering all the facts, and now your own children tell you they don't like her. You need to step back and get a better perspective. Right? And the wording, Brian's wife couldn't be bothered to make it, versus Brenda was out of town. Sounds like Brenda also couldn't be bothered to make it. But, you know, she goes to church so she can be a crappy person and it's okay. Don't forget about how OP stayed out of the inheritance situation because it was none of their business. Interesting that staying out of Brenda's business when she's in the wrong is fine, but sticking their nose into Brian's business is totally fine. The important thing to know about our family is that it has a decent chunk of elderly people and a lot of families. My sister and I are in a group of about 5 within our range. Most of our relatives are about 10 to 15 years older or younger. In other words, everybody else is already an established, read non-partying adult, or they are still kids who are too young to drink alcohol. My sister is a party girl, and it was clear from the start of planning that she was more concerned with making her friends comfortable than our family, which caused issues. She chose a venue 4 hours away from home, but which is closer to them, and which allows alcohol to be served without the expensive insurance the venues at home are required to mandate. So now, people are going to have to spend at least one night in a hotel, on top of everything else. That really isn't likely, and that's before you get into the fact that my sister decided to make the wedding no kids, and that the invitation read, cocktail reception to follow. Okay, so you want us to rent at least 1, if not 2 hotel rooms, pay for overnight childcare. I don't even think that's a thing here. Go to a ceremony, and then you're not even going to feed us? No way. My sister and her fiancé invited 150 people to the wedding. So far, 107 have RSVP'd with no. My sister went on an epic Facebook rant earlier, then called me to complain. Apparently, they've already signed contracts with the vendors and paid non-refundable deposits, covering half of the amount of people my sister and future brother-in-law thought were attending, instead of waiting until after the RSVPs were returned. After about the 3rd or 4th hour on the phone of trying to calm her down, I finally couldn't stop myself from asking her what she really expected to happen. Did she really expect our 97-year-old great-grandpa to travel that far, then spend the night at a reception without food? Did she really expect our cousins with the quadruplets to pay a babysitter to watch them for the better part of 2 days? She's hysterical and made another Facebook rant. She posted about being the black sheep and how nobody ever supports her, and how even I, in her words, my own baby sister, abandoned her when it came to the biggest day of my life. I was feeling fine about what I said before, but that post is weighing on me a bit now. I don't know. Am I the a-hole? Edit because I was unclear. I understand paying a deposit on the venue before sending out the wedding invitations. The issue is that they apparently already paid a non-refundable deposit to the caterer and bartender, etc., for half of who they thought were attending. Not the a-hole. While she has the right to have the wedding she wants, unless she's using family money and going against their wishes, no one is obligated to go, especially with how demanding she's being. You were honest and made good points. Not the a-hole. She needed a reality check. It's the middle of a virus, and she wants elderly people and people with young children to hire sitters for 2 days to drive for hours for a wedding. Lack of food and hotel aside, no one wants to travel that long for a one-time party in the best of times. Everyone sucks here. Your sister shouldn't have gone on those Facebook rants. She also probably should have been a little more realistic about RSVPs when she was booking venues. But I'm not going to hold that against her. It's hard to estimate, especially if you have a lot of obligatory invites who you're not close to. That being said, nothing about your sister's wedding is unreasonable. It's very common for couples to have their weddings near where they live. You also didn't mention where her fiancé's family lives. Could this location also be a compromise for both families? It's not unreasonable to have a kid-free wedding. It's not unreasonable to expect guests to travel a few hours. And a cocktail reception, if you serve enough food, can end up being just as filling as a meal. Had she not made the public posts and instead just vented to immediate family, this would have been a yes the a-hole for me.